Yes. And we've been talking for a while, but it's actually a good idea since we're talking psychology, kind of one psychologist to another, but we're talking Dhamma. So we're using a lot of psychology language, but we're actually talking about the same thing. All
Mm.
right. So we've been talking about the ego, the superego, and the id, and its relationship to the parent, adult, and child of Eric Berne, and how that fits in with the fetters and how we deal with them within Buddhism. And it also fits directly with neuroscience or neuropsychology, that these are actually parent ego states, adult ego states, and uh, child ego states actually have different functions within the brain and actually different areas within the brain too, so that that child ego state would be the reptilian brain, that which is fully functional almost from the time of birth, to where the language skills have to be developed fairly early, but generally after the age of 12 to 14, that the child stops learning uh, in a verbal way, in the sense of opening new vistas. And where I mean by that is that after the age of 12 to 14, it's difficult for a student to learn a foreign language. And I find that since the psychologists know that, it's so bizarre then in America that they teach foreign languages in high school. After the student is incapable of learning a language, only then is he allowed to study it.
Mm.
The time to study French is in the third grade,
Yeah.
not the 11th grade. And so that's a problem with language, but we can see that, okay, but that's the part of the brain that is developed then, and the part that's developed last is the adult reasoning capability that seems to have grown several hundred years ago. It was about the age of 14 to 16, then it got up to 18, then it was 21 for a while. It looks like it's grown to 25, and I've seen 35-year-olds and they still haven't grown up yet. They're still not fully adult. They haven't fully come to that front part of the brain and gotten it fully developed. Well, that's what the teachings of the Buddha is all about. Let's spend as much time and as much effort getting that frontal cortex, that adult ego state, that ego that Freud talks about. Let's get that thing into gear. Let's get it working. Let's get that thing thumping and humming. And one of the best ways to do that is through the breathing and through the breath. That the breath will help energize the brain just from the oxygen, but also the neural connections. They see that when people with MRIs, or when they start to function with, excuse me, they start to breathe consciously, taking deep breaths, that the frontal cortex immediately starts to light up with that deep breath comes that lighting up.
Mm.
What does I
Interesting.
mean by lighting up? That means that the neurons in the frontal cortex begin to fire. And these beginning firings that are being recorded is what gets the breathing going, rather than leaving it in the automatic, back in the reptilian brain, or the part of the brain that manages feelings and movements and all of that.
Uh, Interesting, because that also relates to breathing exercises. It's also called pranayama, I think. While in Buddhist
Absolutely.
circles, we usually just think of the breath as something, as an anchor or something to concentrate on.
Right. But we don't, it's better to see it as an anchor, but not to concentrate on, but to exercise and play with, to take long, deep breaths. That's why actually step one and step two of Anapanasati is long, deep breath. Know that it's a long breath. Know that it's a deep breath coming in. And then on the out breath. Now, the speed of that is not really important. And in fact, there are cases when you want to do that fairly rapidly. For instance, when you're climbing a hill, you go into a state of, the reptilian brain will put you in that state of needing a lot of oxygen. And so you go, come on, let's do it. Come on, let's go. Now notice what's happening with the body.
Starting to tingle.
It's starting to tingle, huh? All right, so that's the most natural way of doing that. But we can do it long, slow, deep breath also. But the important quality is that we've got the body energized by doing that. We've gotten the mind fit for work. And not only that, but it feels good.
Yeah, it feels sort of intense. Like I'm not used to that.
But it feels really good. That's the thing, is to recognize that this feels really good, to be able to breathe like that, to open things up, get it going. It's good too. Just that deep, long sigh. And it's really hard to get the students to understand how important this breathing is, and yet it is actually step one and step two of Anapanasati. I mean, what do we want? The Buddha's teaching this is the way to breathe. And now we also can see that even though Buddhism kind of formally got stamped out, maybe 80 to 100 million people got wiped out. Meanwhile, there was always a lot of competition from the Brahmins about the value of Buddhism. There was a lot of also interplay and interconnectivity with Buddhism, that people would come from other systems into Buddhism, and then they would go through Buddhism and mix back with other cultures. The Vedantas are very close to the teachings of the Buddha. Yoga is also very much so. That one of the big surprises I had was how common it is for the Thai monks to practice yoga. It's almost like a secret cult within the Sangha, because, the Thai people have this idea that the monks are not supposed to dance. Well, they don't do ballroom dancing and they don't do boogie woogie, but why would anybody think that yoga or Tai Chi would be dancing? I don't know, but the monks wind up doing it in private. And they do Tai Chi, they do yoga, and much of the pranayama is actually part of Anapanasati, that they see that deep connection between yoga and pranayama and Anapanasati. It's the same thing. They're very, very closely related, with the effects being the same, and that is that deep breathing in the body really wakes the body up. It flushes it out. It makes it clean again. Even now, after you stop doing that, you still feel very light.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I've never heard someone talk about like that, or actually tried it myself. It's great.
Excellent. All right. But you do know that if you're hill climbing, you've got to breathe that way. Or you'll have to stop and breathe that way. One or the other. You'll either continue to climb the hill with that deep breathing, or you'll stop and you'll do that deep breathing. This is actually part of Anapanasati. It's part of pranayama breathing. The question is not how fast that you breathe in and out, but that you're doing it fully. And then we let it go back to the soft breath, which is the much more reptilian brain. And then we grab it again. And so we give it back. So we give it back to the reptilian brain, and then we grab it again. And then we give it back to the reptilian brain, and then we grab control again. And this is the practice that we go through. I was talking to a student the other day, and he was talking about having leg pain. And he says, oh, yes, I already have been doing the Goenka method. I really look at it. And it says, yes, but you're missing the other part that I was already told you about, and that is the hide and the seek, in the sense that first you seek it out, you really get in touch with it, and then you ignore it. You put it out of the mind completely. so that you don't pay any attention to that leg pain at all for maybe a minute or two. Maybe you can do some deep breathing during that time. Then
Yeah,
you go back and look at the pain later.
they also say that in the Granka course, actually, like you just keep going with the body scan, and maybe if something stays, you investigate a bit deeper, but then you move on again. So you don't make it more important than all the other sensations that are there.
Exactly. That's exactly the way that they teach it.
Hmm.
But that's more of a stylized way because they're wanting to stay within the boundaries of step 3 of Anapanasati, which is experiencing the body. And those body scans are really, really excellent for doing that.
Hmm.
But it's not the only way that you can get fully in touch with the body through the breathing, of watching. In fact, you could say that it's actually quite natural with the Goenka method, and there comes a point. I know that they start at the top. Boy, did we. I spent 3 years with Goenka, so I've got it down pretty well. But you start at the top of the head and you work down, but once you get down to the body, especially around the shoulders area, and start moving down, now you're doing natural Anapanasati anyway. In
Because
the
there's
sense
so much
of the
sensation.
because there's so much happening, right? You touch the side of you can feel the touch of the cloth, you can feel the rising and falling on the side, you can feel the back movement, you can feel everything. You start watching, you can feel, even with a deep breath, even the shoulders will rise and collapse. So the whole body is in motion.
Hmm.
And then normally it's the legs that are in pain. And so now you go down and you visit and say, hello, Mr. I don't like you stuff. I'm going to see what's there. But then you move on. All right. But when you move on, you can move back. In other words, the point is, in this case, is to get away from it. Work with it, look at it, notice it deeply, and then move away from it. And spend that same amount of time completely ignoring it. It's out of the bounds. I'm the champion here, and you're just a little old leg sensation. You are not the boss of me. That's the right attitude to have.
How would you apply the breath, for example, as we just did it in just formal sitting meditation? I was thinking it might make sense to start out the meditation with it, and whenever you get a bit sleepy or something like that, do that again. Or
Right, especially if you get sleepy, that's good. Or whenever you like it, whenever you think of it. But in
okay.
all cases, go back at least to a breath that's known. That's one of the qualities of Anapanasati that a lot of people don't understand. It's got layers to it. One of the subtleties is that, yes, every step and every stage and every part of Anapanasati does require the breath. It's very easy to see the breath in step 1, 2, and 3, but by going to the relaxing the body, that's harder to see the breath's involvement with that. But it's there. Now with the piti, the Buddha also says, oh no, while you're breathing, while you're understanding your breathing, you're training the body for great joy, great rapture, great happiness. And then, in fact, this breathing that we're doing is one of the things that'll help take you into those states. And so
So,
then we go, after we do that, and after we do that breathing for a while, or we take a deep breath, on that outflow of the sigh is now Sukkha. The word Sukkha in Pali is also the same word that they have in Thai. The Thai language has that word Sukh, and it comes from the Pali. It also has an opposite. That word is Duk, and that comes from the Pali. There it is, Sukha and Dukkha, what we're really getting at is satisfaction, or Sukha, or a state of pleasure, is the opposite of Dukkha. So getting into that state of pleasure through the breathing and the piti and the being able to clean the mind out of the hindrances now are all the qualities that we need for the first jhana. which has that happiness and pleasure that's born of the seclusion, and that the mind is now supercharged and ready for work.
Mhm.
And what are we going to do with that mind that's really supercharged and fit for work? Well, what we're really meaning is that the frontal cortex is now in gear. It's really working. And
Yeah,
that's
well,
when we can begin to see how things go. And one of the things that we start looking at are what kind of thoughts are we going to have that are going to keep us out of this? Now, what we can actually look at is now there's a relationship between the superego, or our remembered oughts, shoulds, couldas, wouldas, done it, etc., and start to put in new stuff that's more wholesome and more valuable. This is where we want to use that superego part of the mind to store the Dhamma, to store the joy, to store the wouldas, couldas, and shouldas. Like I would have taken a deep breath if I could have remembered.
mm.
And so we start storing that kind of stuff in there to remember, to keep coming back, to practice the Eightfold Noble Path as we're doing this, to have right sati, right effort, to have right attitude, to have right noble view. And so we start incorporating the path. Well, that becomes then part of that superego that Freud would talk about, or the parent system, and that's very wholesome. So now we have something, instead of bringing us back to our childhood memories and our fears, now we've got an adult that's going to keep us safe and secure.
So it seems there is, I don't know if you know Daniel Kahneman.
No, I don't know that name.
He's
Say it again.
Daniel Kahneman, and actually
Kahneman.
Amos Tversky. Uh, Kahneman he's a psychologist, but he got the economics Nobel Prize for his research. And basically he did a lot of research about heuristics, about how people cut short their thinking because they don't do it consciously. It's just how the mind automatically works and simplifies our world. And he made a model of two systems. One is system one, he says, which we normally function in, is quite automatic. It's based on these automatic heuristics that we use, and we're not so aware of it, and it doesn't cost much or any energy. And that's at the same time, system two is voluntary, conscious, costs energy, so that's why it's limited in capacity. And it sounds like that's what we're training more in this adult state or ego, or while we're practicing anapanasati, to be able to spend more of our day in that system two, and maybe be able to train a system one in the form of the super ego, or how our inner child, if you may call it like that, reacts to things. So maybe that's a bit where insight or wisdom comes in, that you just naturally start to behave in a more intelligent way without needing to constantly monitor with anapanasati or system 2.
Right. It becomes much more natural. Exactly so, because the training now is that it's a new set of patterns. That the superego is much more of a high quality, giving good quality advice and not beating up on the child. While at the same time, we've been training them the frontal cortex, or the adult ego state, or the ability to see clearly, which would be what the Buddha would call right attitude and right view, is to start getting a noble view of things, begin to wake up and see what's really going on. And in the process of that, Now let's look at that child, the id, or the child ego state, that is also what we would associate with the reptilian brain. And that's the way that we have to look at it, in the sense of that most of the way that an individual human feels is based upon how he has been in the habit of feeling. We don't feel the way we want to feel. We feel the way that we have been feeling. We feel it according to a habit pattern. But those habits can be changed. We can begin to start feeling good. In fact, most people spend most of their time either feeling bad or feeling confused. They either don't like it or they don't know what. And we, as human beings, do not spend a lot of time in great joy. That's why we seek it out so strenuously. That's why amusement parks are there. People will go to the amusement park because they're looking for happiness and joy, and it only comes instantaneously here and there, while most of their journey to that resort is just same old, same old. Long lines, big fees. And so they wind up suffering through their whole time that they're spending all this money on for enjoyment. They call it entertainment. And yet that
Right.
actual thrill on the roller coaster is very, very short-lived compared to the long line people got to stand in to get to that roller coaster if it's a very popular one.
Yeah.
So that's the way that we look at it, is that we spend very little time in great joy and almost all of our time in the habit that we have been feeling. Now, I used to tell the story about Egg McMahon, but nobody remembers Egg McMahon anymore. I think, in fact, he may not have made it, but he was the announcer on the Johnny Carson show, and every night his main number one job, besides laughing at everything that Johnny Carson said, at the beginning he would say, "Here's Johnny."
Oh,
So,
that's where that is coming from.
it's from Ed McMahon. Well, later he began to sell. Uh, uh, he was an advertising man on the television promoting. Publishers Clearinghouse that owned so many magazines. And so he was a magazine pusher. And one of the things they had was a promo about giving people who filled out the right forms or took the right magazines or whatever, that that Ed McMahon would come to their door, knock on their door, and give them a big, big check for $10 million, while the pretty girls and the cameras and everything was there to show them to getting a new big check for $10 million. Every time I tell that story, every student that I see, including you smile, thinking about getting $10 million. But the actually getting $10 million may be really, really hard work. First off, you start hating the IRS because they want a third or maybe more. Then you've got neighbors who want a loan. You've got relatives you never met before. And oftentimes, what happens is a big windfall. 3 or 4 years later, the person is destitute and in worse shape than he was before he got the big money. That's why the lotteries have started doling it out for 20 years. Every year for 20 years, you get some of it, because we don't want you to screw it all away. All right. So, this is what happens with that child ego state. But there's something that we just missed. And remember that just telling the story was enough to smile on. Just the
Yeah.
story. All right. Well, if that's the case, then we need to start telling ourselves better stories.
Yeah, there's this technique of visualization, which I sometimes think of. It's used by people who believe in the law of attraction to imagine you're winning the lottery, or you're in your dream job or driving the car you like. It's often projected on quite materialistic things, but it seems like a good
Uh-huh.
way to prime your mind to more focus on that, like a new positive
The
vision instead of.
question is, are you doing it without desire? Because you can do these things and really, really want to do
Hmm.
it, or really want that money, and you cannot be happy without it. And so that comes the intensity there. But what you're talking about is exactly what we are thinking about in the sense of, instead of saying, like, in the future, may I be happy, may all beings someday in the future be happy. The right way to do it is, wow, this is really good stuff. This is happiness. Gosh, I wish everybody had this stuff right now. This is wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
To get it, to have it. And that breathing is going to be very helpful to bring one's up to that high state of mind. Back before we were talking about it, there's the loser, then there's the materialistic winner who struggles to get more and more materialism. But then the better way of winning is to just give up all of that and say, hey, I can feel good right now. And while I'm feeling good, I can do whatever the hell I choose to do. My game now, because I've got my own super ego. I got my own set of rules now. I've got my own way of doing things, and my way of doing things always brings joy and happiness.
Yeah. And it's easy.
It is actually easy. The path of the Buddha is not hard. But look how many stumbling blocks get put in the way.
Yeah.
Everything that people hear about Buddhism winds up being a hindrance to the actual practice of Buddhism. One, it's the religion. They bow and scrape. They've got a bunch of old books. They've got this thing called enlightenment, and nobody's got it anymore. They got this thing called rebirth, and it's different from reincarnation, but we're not sure why. We just know that it's Buddhist, and you got to believe it no matter what. Even though the Buddha himself in the Kalama Sutra said, don't believe things because you were told. Don't believe them because they're in some old book. That you got to investigate this stuff. You got to look inside the mind, and when you actually see it, so in fact, this system that we've got here of the parent, the child, and the adult ego states, or the id, the ego, and the superego, this is actually quite valuable for people to begin to see, understand, oh, this is the way that the human mind operates. And that there's no me or soul in there that's in charge. That in fact, I'm out of control with my feelings. That I'm feeling the way that I did when I was 2 years old. I'm not feeling the way I want to feel. So how can there be a self in there controlling those feelings? It's got to be a different thing, a mechanism, but whatever it ain't me. If it were me, I'd do it the way I wanted to do it. So for sure, there's no me in there. And when we recognize that, then we can also recognize that, oh, well, a lot of what I thought I was only a bunch of stuff that I stored in there from my parents, and I did it indiscriminately. So every good thing and every bad thing mom said, and every good thing and every bad thing a teacher said, and all of that stuff got mixed in together because they were not happy people. If a child could be raised by a happy adult, that kid's probably going to be happy. But no, we don't get raised by happy people. We get raised by people who were just like us, only back then, miserable. And so we teach that misery, and we teach it in the form of this set of rights, rules, rituals, regulations. It's our whole society, and it teaches us all the right way, right down to the way we feel. And so that storage system is what the Buddha would call the verbal sankara. It's the oughts, woulds, shoulds, all of the concepts. And we can straighten that stuff out and begin to say, oh no, I'm going to put very wholesome stuff into that storage system. And I'm going to start to ignore the unwholesome stuff. And in that regard, we begin to say, well, wait a minute, if all of the really good, wholesome stuff is stuff I'm happening now, then let's throw everything of the past out. Let's start ignoring everything that is not now. And now we're kicking into high gear. Let's just start ignoring the past altogether and just be here now. Let's take on some good ways of doing things. Let's take on the Dhamma. Let's take on Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha so that we can spend a lot of time in Dukkha Nirodha, a lot of time in Sukkha, and not any time much at all in Dukkha.
So Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha, or awareness of them, would be in that case just noticing whenever you're in one of the two. So in which one of the two you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also knowing that Sukha is a state to be developed, and that Dukkha is the natural, normal state that people are in. And so you come out of the normal, natural way. Here's a very easy little technique to go through. It doesn't take very long, but you can sit anytime and ask yourself the same question or a series of questions over and over and over and over again. All right. If I'm not feeling really wonderful right now, what is it that I need to do in order to feel wonderful? Then we'll think about, well, today I've got this email. And then I say, okay, if that email is going to come in, if that guy writes that email and sends it to me or not, has nothing to do with how I feel. If I want that email or if I don't want that email, I'm still going to be okay whether it comes in or not. Therefore, I do not need that email in order for me to feel good, to feel happy. And so we start going, well, there was an email that I don't care. Then there is, oh, I've got a student who's going to call on Skype. Never mind. If he calls or not calls, that's not a point. I can still sit here and be happy. And so you start looking at what is it that would keep me from being happy right now? And we wind up with clearing the whole table. Nothing. There is nothing that's going to cause me from being happy. Isn't that marvelous? I can sit here and feel good because there's nothing that's causing me to be unhappy anymore. And you don't need a meditation posture to do that in. You could just simply go through a checklist and say, yep, I'm good.
Yeah, it how do you say that, cleans up some arguments that your mind will bring up. Whereas simple mindfulness may sometimes, if you use it in a not ideal way, just feel like you're pushing it away, but soon it will come again. But you're not bringing in the insight that you really don't need that thing that you're pushing away.
Yeah, don't need it. Out. I can be happy without that email. I can be happy without that meal. I can be happy without that cup of coffee. I can be happy without getting out of the chair. I don't need any of those things. I can just be here. Tam asked me, are you hungry? I said, no, I'm good. I'm good. She's laughing. Do you want to go to town? No, I'm good. Everything is good. That's the way. When there's nothing to do, then things get really good. So that's a very easy way to get into that state. Well, there's nothing to do.
Yeah, sometimes I find it hard to get from the cognitive part to really feeling that way. Everything is good. There's like, okay, yeah, I don't need that, but on the emotional level, there's still some. Yeah.
That's what to be addressed. Look at that emotional feeling. Look at that little niggle or that uncomfortable sensation inside. Look at it. Breathe into it. Breathe deeply into it. Breathe heavy into it, like we were doing before. Do some breathing. Then check it out again and see about that.
Then let it go, or
You don't have to let it go. If you're doing all that breathing to do that we were talking about, you've already let it go. Your mind is occupied in breathing now, not in feeling unhappy or dissatisfied. You want to get yourself into that state of Sukkha and then stay there. That's the only job there is to do. That's the first jhana. Get into first jhana and stay there.
Okay.
And if that becomes just unsatisfactory, that you want more, practice it again until you can get yourself back into a state of satisfaction. Because once you get yourself into a place of nice satisfaction, there's nothing really left to do. You don't need second jhana if you've really got first jhana and it's really satisfying. You don't need second jhana. Might be useful, but you don't need it. You can say, oh, well, I've got first jhana and I'm completely satisfied. I don't need to be an arahat. I'm just satisfied with the way things are right now. But surprisingly enough, while you're in that state of satisfaction, you're behaving the way that an arahat behaves. Because an arahat's not a designated individual. It's a standard of living. And in that state of satisfaction, you're living a very, very high standard of living. Quite noble. It's always the ordinary, the low-class people who are always dissatisfied. No matter how much money they got, they want whatever it is that they want more of it. And they're never satisfied. But the Buddha's teaching is dead easy. It really is. Everything is so easy. All you have to do is just be satisfied. Just be happy with the way things are. It's a very simple practice once you get it down, but it's got all these intricate details that we need to keep track of in order to place yourself in that state of Sukkha. You have to do sati. You have to do right effort. You have to do right noble attitude. You have to have right view. You've got to practice the path. But once you do, then you can use that breathing and that energy to bring yourself up to that state of absolute can-do attitude. This is really nice. I've got it. That's the state to get into. And stay there. So it's really easy to talk about it at this level, but it's still going to take effort. It's going to take that right noble effort over and over again. Keep coming back and coming back, because you'll find things to tear you out of it. Actually, you won't find things that tear you out of it. That's why they tear you out of it. If you find them, they won't. Funny way about language like that.
Yeah. So
now let's look at it go ahead. You were about to say something.
No, just addition that it really helps to have this breathing as a way to bring your body and your emotions into it, to like stimulate certain emotions, because that's been a stumbling block for me, to think, okay, I recognize something, but what I said in one of the last talk, there's not enough oomph behind this recognizing to really actively work with it, to change it.
I probably said then use the breath, but now we've got a much better example. Give it that oomph. Do that breathing. Get some oxygen in. That's the way of going. So back to what I was about to say next is that basically there are two things that we have to look for. One is unwholesome thoughts. Once we get ourselves into that state of Sukkha, once we are in the first jhana and we're going to maintain it, the way to keep going is by monitoring both the thoughts and the feelings, because they're kind of separate. One of them is like up here, and the other one is kind of like down here, sort of mentally or in a spatial kind of way. That the hindrance is normally express themselves as verbal thoughts, but they also express themselves as feelings. And that the thoughts that we're going to look for are the kind of unwholesome thoughts that are going to take us out of that state, or the state that we're almost always in when we're not in that state. These are the kind of thoughts that are there: thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, thoughts about get that job done, thoughts about I've got this, thoughts about I want this, thoughts about I got to get rid of that, thoughts of I don't want that. These are the kinds of thoughts that will um, keep a mind in an ordinary state of confusion. There's a lot of doubt, etc., like that. But when we bring ourselves up out of that, then we're not going to let any of those kind of thoughts come into the mind. We're going to let only wholesome thoughts come into the mind, like, oh, this is the third noble truth. Wow, this is freedom from suffering. Oh, wow, that's great. Or this is the second noble truth. Bango, I see that I make my own suffering. It's my own greed. It's my own stupidity. It's my own ill will that harms me and others. And we begin to see that over and over and over again. And we can tell ourselves little stories about how wholesome and valuable it is to be out of suffering and into a state of relaxation, into a state of pleasure. That this is the way that we want to maintain it. So these are the kind of thoughts that we'll have. And surprisingly enough, thoughts about the Four Noble Truths and the five aggregates and these things about Buddhism, continue to think about those will help us stay in a state of satisfaction. But thinking about the world, thinking about going to town, thinking about a meal, thinking about whatever it is that we want, that's going to take us down into the ordinary lifestyle. So this is why we want to keep the mind clean and pure with only wholesome thoughts. Now let's look at it at the other level, and that is feelings. Normally, while you're doing this, you will actually begin to experience bodily feelings. One of the ways of dealing with these feelings in the body, and let's give a short list first: anxiety, fear, anger, sadness, grief. The one that most meditators spend their most time with not seeing is anxiety. Anxiety is what will cause us to be in competition with another person. I'm a better meditator than he is. Look, I can sit up straighter than he does. Or all of those kind of thoughts. But they come from this state of anxiety. We need to start getting in touch with this layers of feelings that when they're there, we're really not satisfied with them. So when you feel feelings of anxiety, what you want to do is go back into some breathing, start looking at it that way. Breathe into it as a way of talking about it. Find out where the anxiety is in the body and start to breathe into it. As opposed to what normally people happen is the anxiety will come, it's kind of subliminal, it's kind of subconscious. We're not really fully watching it and aware of it like we would in this state that we're talking about at first jhana. So when that anxiety comes, then the thoughts around that anxiety. In other words, if I feel X, then I should do Y so that I stop feeling X. An example of that would be the old farmer who was in his hovel and he's full of anxiety in the night. And so he says, I know what I've got to do. I should go fix the fence. And so he goes out in the night and he fixes the fence so that the goats can't get out and the wolves can't get in. He comes back into the hovel after a couple hours of work. He lays down and guess what? The anxiety came back. It wasn't the fence. So how many times has that happened to you? How many fences have you fixed trying to get rid of a subliminal anxiety when in fact the anxiety did not get fixed by fixing the fence? The anxiety was an excuse for the mind trying to find something to do to get rid of the anxiety. Now we're going to work with the anxiety directly.
if we breathe into it, for example, it seems like that we did earlier might exaggerate the anxiety because it's quite
Check it out.
active.
Check it out. Figure that out for yourself. Make sure that you know. Maybe it
Okay.
will, maybe it won't. I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to argue with you. You got to go find out. You need to inspect your own body anyway. This is not my meditation. I know how to do it. This is for you to
Right.
figure out.
All right.
You go look at that. You go find out what's in there. That in fact, you might find that all of the breathing that you're doing has changed your blood chemistry. And that those tension feelings might have had to do with blood pressure and blood situations. So all of that breathing flushed all of that stuff out. And in fact, the anxiety feelings may float away. They may come right out the breath. Or that kind of breathing may make you really tensed up inside and, oh, I really hate myself now. Oh, what have I got to do with all of this anxiety? You know, that might happen too. Up to you. Your choice.
What I notice now is I still notice the effects of this breathing earlier. I also notice breathing differently. So that's really fascinating to notice. Yeah, such a basic thing.
The Buddha knew all about it. Yoga folks, they know all about it. Sports people know all about it. Elephants know all about it. Why is it so? Fish know all about it too, surprisingly enough. Why is it so hard for the average, ordinary person to figure out how important the breath is to maintain our well-being? That whenever we start to think about death, what happens with people is they begin to stop breathing, they shut down. Without giving you too much detail, I have had a student who was a psychologist. In fact, she still is a psychologist, but in her old age, she has become, let's just call it, decrepit. And that she's now worried
What's
about,
decrepit again? Sorry.
means that her body is falling apart. She's no
Okay.
longer able to do anything that she wants to do. She's gotten old. But the song she sings is that I'm worried about how will I take care of myself when my husband dies. Because that's not the real issue. The real issue is not who's going to take care of her when her husband dies. More than likely, in most situations, in our culture, they'll just put her someplace where somebody can take care of her until she dies. And if that doesn't happen when her husband stops taking care of her, then what's going to happen? She's going to die. So now we're getting down to it. It's not about her husband dying at all.
It's
The
about her.
issue is not, yeah, it's not about her husband dying and her loss of care. It's that when that happens, then she's going to die. And so if she can work on her own fear of death, then it won't matter when her husband dies. She can give him a really lovely send-off. But as long as she's grasping and clinging, oh, I need you, don't die on me. And then here's a corpse, and don't die on me. You know, why? Because I need you. She hasn't really addressed the real issue at all. The real issue is I'm afraid of my own death. And as you said from that book that you were reading, that it comes back from the time of when we were 2 years old. That's when we come in contact with real death. Generally, I'm going to die if I if I can't get what I want to die. That's what tantrums are all about. I mean, if you look at a little child having a tantrum, isn't it really a life or death situation? If I can't have that, I'll die. And so that fear of death carries us right along. And in fact, that fear of death is one of the major obstacles to being able to practice meditation correctly. Why? Because there's a whole class of them. First off, most Buddhists throughout the world don't do any meditation at all. They go to the temple, they do their little pujas, they do this, that, and the other thing. They have their belief systems and whatnot, but they don't do any real meditation. And all of that has to do with, oh, well, you can't do meditation because meditation is something you got to spend years doing. You got to become a monk and do it for years and years to get a little bit of benefit. So why don't you just donate to the temple and then you can have a better life next time or whatever. And this is the standard story for most people. So that kind of mentality, that story, is not the teaching of the Buddha at all, but it has become Buddhism. And so that's the number one obstacle because that's what keeps most people out of it. The second obstacle is the obstacle of, oh, well, I'm going to practice meditation because I want insight into the nature of reality, but I still have all of these next lives to go through. So then the saying is that, okay, well, let's get some attainments. Let's start doing jhanas. And then the other side trip is, okay, well, let's go have jhanas or some sort of situation or state so that I can remember past lives. Because if I can remember past lives, number one, nobody else on the block can do it. I'm the champion of being able to remember past lives. But two, that'll help cement or prove to me that past lives do exist. But if the student has such an experience, now he begins to lust for, oh, I want another one. One dab will not do me. I need 2 past lives. I need 100. I need 1,000. I need 100,000 past lives. You know, that's the way that they go. And so they take their same materialism from the normal world and put it into their Buddhist practice, and that can be called spiritual materialism, wanting to get something out of the practice. And almost everybody starts that way. We have to get them out of the frame of reference of past and future. And so believing in rebirth is one thing that's going to keep you stuck in past and future. Let's come out of that. Let's forget that breathing or that teaching for a while. And let's look at what's really going on. And so that's the way to help them get out of it. But it's really hard once they get into, oh, I've got to have this attainment, or, oh, I've got to work this hard, or whatever like that. Then they start to struggle. They start using wrong effort, and they wind up not getting much benefit. And they will eventually quit practicing anapanasati or meditation of any kind because they're not really getting anything out of it, because they want something from it.
Do you have any view then on for example, we've talked about Sotapanna, which is seen as the first step out of 4 sort of levels of enlightenment, and I'm not really deep in that, but there's still the view that an arahant is sort of the highest you could go, and it's easy to get caught up in words, but it's seen as desirable in a way, maybe that at least less dukkha arises naturally in your mind.
But most people look at it in the sense of an accomplishment, or in the sense of a competition, or an attainment.
Mm-hmm.
To where really the point is that there's nothing to attain. Why are you bothering?
Even though it might be true that this is possible?
Well, not only is it possible, it's common in Thailand. There are very, very famous monks who that it just gets out. The last one that I know of that was really big time was Achan Mahaboa from Udon Thani. He died in 2012, but he drew enormous crowds because they knew that this man had something going. But he was a ferocious tiger. He was a lion. He would roar. And Westerners hear someone roaring in Thai language, they think that he's an angry old fart. And so they say, how could this monk do anything? He doesn't know nothing. But the Thai people, they know what an arahant is, and they know how powerful and important these really roaring lions are. And so they flock to them by the thousands. So the arahat is not what we think an arahat is. An arahat, if you want to look at it like this, is a roaring lion who is not attached to anything except the truth, and he's willing to tell it in front of everybody, no matter what. Doesn't matter how many police lieutenants and captains or generals he pisses off. It doesn't matter who the head of the army he ticks off. He treats everybody the same. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, by the way, I'm just giving two examples. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa actually told the general of the army to sit down over there and wait your turn. The general of the army of Thailand. And you do know that since 1930s, this has actually been a military dictatorship. Another example of it was the king of Thailand offered Bhikkhu Buddhadasa a free ride on the helicopter. All he had to do was say yes, and that helicopter would have come to Wat Suan Mok, picked him up, and taken him to have the very best medical treatment in Bangkok. And what did Bhikkhu Buddhadasa say? Never mind. No thanks. I'll die here happily. I don't need to go in your helicopter to Bangkok. Another thing that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa did was quite a lion's roar. In fact, possibly the biggest one of all was when he was designated as Chao Kun. Now, in Thailand, there's about 300 monks that are of the toppest quality that are normally listed as Chao Kun. They're the very, very best of Thailand. And I've known several personally who have reached to that point of Chao Kun. In fact, we have now some Westerners who have been designated Chao Kun. I'm impressed. Achan Samedo and I think Achan Amaro also. I'm not sure about Achan Pasano, but Achan Prasert, and I know quite a number. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, when he was designated as Chao Kun, he refused it. He said, no, I'm good. I do not need to be recognized by the royal family. I do not have to come kiss some royal butt. I'm good to go. Thank you.
What a guy.
What a guy. Exactly. There's something else that very few people know about, and that was that his teacher, the one teacher that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had, was the Samdet Sangharaj of Thailand. His name was Buddha Gosajarn. He died in 1950, but Buddha Gosajarn helped Bhikkhu Buddhadasa get out of all the trouble he was in the 1930s by teaching the Noble Dhamma to the public. And a lot of monks didn't want him teaching that. They were actually saying, oh, no, he's teaching the wrong thing. But they were actually referencing later literature. And so a long kind of Dhamma investigation proved Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was right. But there was already a lot of monks who knew that, including Buddha Gosajarn, this Samdet Sangharaj, the head of the Samdet. And guess who his teacher was? His teacher was a king of Thailand who was a prince. And so this lineage of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa goes right back into the deepest, most royal lineages of Thailand. He is not just some temple boy who wandered into some Wat Suan Mok and the next thing you know, he's famous. Oh no, he mixed with the very best of company. That's why the king was so impressed with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, was because Bhikkhu Buddhadasa already was in the, let us say, in the inner circle before the king at that time was born. You know, the king of Thailand just recently died. I forgot how old he was, but he was really up there. But he became king in 1948. Well, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was already a famous monk under the wings of the royal lineage of monks in the 1930s. And so when the king of Thailand became king of Thailand, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was already right there in center stage. But Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was not the only arahat. In fact, everything indicates that Buddha Sojourn was also arahat, and so was I forget his name, the prince. So there's been a great, deep interconnection between the royal house of Thailand and the Sangha of Thailand that has the real teachings of the Buddha well preserved, that is not available to the ordinary people. And I feel so blessed to have been a student of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. There's only a few. I can name you, in fact, only about 10 Westerners who have really been good students of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And they're all enormously grateful. And now Ajahn Po has given the thing, let's put this out on the internet. Let's actually let the real Dhamma of the Buddha out. Because it really is a simple practice. Anybody could do it. You don't have to become a monk. All you have to do is become happy.
Are Ajahn Po, Sumedho, Amaro, are they teaching in Thailand? Or
Actually, there's a new video on Ajahn Sumedho from, I think, like April of 2019. It's really good to see him back in public again, because for years he was in, let us say, the environments around Wat Pabong, rather, up in Udon Ratchasima. And that, surprisingly enough, Westerners would go to see him and nobody could find him. He was always someplace else. The Thai monks say, go there. And he would go there. And then they say, well, Sumedho just left here yesterday. And he went that away. And nobody would. But now he's actually back in public. Or he was, at least for one talk. And surprisingly enough, that talk was for Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. It was done for the BIA, the Bhikkhu Buddhadasa Itapanyo archives. Now, another one, in fact, go to those archives and you will find a lot of stuff. A lot of videos from Santikaro, a lot of videos of Ajahn Sumedho. Certainly, Ajahn Sumedho was a student of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. In fact, I met Ajahn Sumedho at Wat Suan Mok. That's where I met Ajahn Sumedho back in 1985.
yeah, just found some videos by one video by Ajahn Sumedho, but I'm not sure if it's at this archive. But it is from 2019, so it seems like it should be that.
Yeah, that's probably it. Yep, that's it.
Okay. You have a look at that.
All right. So let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
The wrap up is there is a noble Dhamma. It has been inside the Sangha for 2,500 years. It has been part of the royal lineage, and that it is now coming out and available. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa started that and got into trouble in the 1930s. But Thailand now is open, and it's time for the open Sangha to come to the West. It's no longer dangerous to let this stuff out. And it is best transmitted on a one-to-one. It is not well transmitted in a group of, let us say, in a 10-day meditation group where you've got 100 or more students listening to one teacher in a format. That the right way for the Dhamma to be taught is on an individual basis, one-on-one, for a few hours, maybe dozens of hours. In fact, the more time that it takes, the better.
Yeah. How is that?
Because it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper into the psyche that this is the right way to live. This is the right way to feel. I do not have to feel sad. I can feel happy and I can choose how I feel. And I've got all the techniques and tools I need to do that. And the beautiful
Yeah.
part is this just chases right back to the absolute deep teachings of the Buddha himself. That one world class person that is so famous that he's been lasting now 2,500 years, and that everything that he knew, he figured out for himself and he understood it to be correct. And now you have Freud, Adler, Burns, NLP folks, all of those guys coming back and rediscovering the same territory that the Buddha knew about 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, and it's still so, like, I'm kind of baffled how clear it is when we talk about it, when you tell me about these things. I just wanted to express my appreciation for this. This is really,
I know about that because
it's,
I have that same appreciation for Achan Po and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. I really am thankful. And so this is the lineage. The lineage is really a lineage of thanksgiving, a lineage of gratitude. This stuff is so good that it is priceless. No amount of money would ever be enough.
yeah, yeah. Just wanted to say I'm very fascinated about where it will go. But
Well, we're
yeah,
fascinated with where it is now.
yeah.
Because here it is. All
So
right,
yeah,
Christian. Well, we'll put this on the internet and we'll see you soon.
yeah. See you soon. Maybe then about dependent arising again.
Yes. Well, that's what we've been talking about all day. Just using
Right,
a slightly different language. See you.
right. Bye.